From Buffalo Wild Wings on Louise Avenue in Sioux Falls, welcome to Benchwarmers. Today's featured guests are Dakota Wesleyan University head men's basketball coach Matt Wilbur, Midco Sports Network basketball analyst Brad Newitt, Midco Sports Network's Jay Elsen, and our host, Midco Sports Network's Tom Nieman.
Hello, welcome to Benchwarmers. We are at Buffalo Wild Wings here on Louise Avenue in Sioux Falls. Our thanks to them again this year. And our esteemed panel joining us, Jay Elsen, Matt Wilbur, Brad Newitt, and we'll get into the NBA Finals. We'll get into the Stanley Cup Final, talk about Tiger. We'll talk about some baseball coming up here, but going to talk some college basketball first with these guys. And let's give it up, first of all, to Matt Wilbur and Dakota Wesleyan University.
Hey.
National runners-up last year, 32 wins against 5 losses. Didn't end the way you wanted to, but great season.
Right. We had a great run. You know, it was one of those where it just wasn't us getting hot at the end. We had a good year all the way around. We started off hot, and we give a lot of credit to our kids. You know, we had a good group of kids. We graduated 4 seniors and one, All-American and another third-team All-American. So it was a lot of fun, and probably the most fun we had was in the Corn Palace. Just how much involvement the community of Mitchell and the surrounding areas were a part of it. It was a really cool year.
It kind of revitalized the program a little bit. You guys agree with that?
Oh, there's no doubt, and I think Dakota Wesleyan hiring you, Matt, I think was a great fit. You brought a lot of energy to the program, and we're really starting to see that. And I knew you guys were in store for great things when I had a chance to watch you play South Dakota State in an exhibition game. And you gave the Jackrabbits all they wanted that night. Your kids played really well, I thought, and had a lot of fun and a lot of confidence in that game.
Yeah, that's one of those, you take a bunch of South Dakota kids up to Frost Arena, that's what we had a lot of, and that's an exciting game for them, and we're at an advantage at that game. I mean, South Dakota State's not doing a scouting report for Dakota Wesleyan, so we come in and run sets and fire away and don't have anything to lose. That's a big game for our guys. But yeah, we were a couple of rim in and out shots from making that pretty interesting. We were down 1 with a minute to go, but that was a fun time for us. And you bring it up, our guys were like wondering how good we were going to be this year, and that was a stepping stone for us.
And you've kind of become a destination for a lot of very good kids from South Dakota, Corsica, Huron, and Mitchell, and maybe some kids that are D2 borderline that can play at the NAIA level. You kind of become that destination.
Yeah, but that's been our focus, and I grew up in Miller, South Dakota. Grew up watching the Northern Wolves, and they did that. They had that model. I look at us in the same way. We got a lot of the small towns support our program, a lot like Northern does, and down in our area, and it's been a successful. It's been the right method for us. So we're going to continue it, and we'll see. We had a good run in the national tournament with a bunch of small town kids, and we're going to see if we can continue that.
All right, as you said, Division II NAIA national runners-up last year, lost to Cornerstone of Michigan in the national championship game, but that gets us into. You guys scored 45 points in that game, and that was an anomaly. I know that. It was the lowest scoring championship game they've ever had there. But we want to talk about, as we sit here today, the NCAA rules committees are either going to approve or not approve some changes in the game of NCAA and NAIA basketball. So, is it broken right now? These changes are going to bring more flow, supposedly more offense to the game. Do we need more of that in college basketball?
A bit of it is in the eye of the beholder. I think it's just whatever you prefer as a fan to watch. And a person who's been around the game, coached the game, played the game, may feel differently about that than the casual fan. I think if you look at being a Wisconsin fan, there's a lot of people out there that will look at the Badgers' style of play and say, yeah, it's broken. We need to fix that.
No, but if they score 67, that's a good game.
Yeah, and that's just the way it's always been. So if you're used to seeing that, you kind of have an appreciation for it. But I certainly could see the other side of it. I could see the excitement in more points, more offense. But I don't know that it necessarily makes the game better. I think that's the question everybody's got to have.
All right, the average total for men's basketball last year was just over 67 points a game. A lot of people think that's not enough. So they're talking about reducing the shot clock from 35 down to 30 seconds. Is that a good idea? Will it make a big difference?
Well, we didn't run into a problem last year getting shots up. I think so. I think when you look at the NCAA, the athletes are so big and so strong, and frankly, there's a lot of freshmen and sophomores playing at the major college level. It's tougher to get, the whole offensive system under your belt and making shots at a change of speed. I think that has as much to do with it as any rules do. But yeah, when you start taking seconds off the shot clock, you got to get shots up quicker. There's going to be more shots, whether those are good or bad. Yeah. You're going to see more shots, and you would think that would lead to more points. But like we averaged 80 to 85 points a game last year at our level. But we don't have guys in front of the rim like Wisconsin has to deal with, and Duke has to deal with. We have a little bit better opportunity to score that way. But yeah. And
if the NCAA adopts changes, does that carry over automatically to the NAIA level?
Yeah, that's gonna trickle down. That'll happen. I know the women's side is waiting on a number of rule changes with just quarters and halves and stuff, and everything I'm hearing is the NAIA will adopt anything the NCAA does.
All right, you're Mr. Points per possession. Do you like the reduction in the shot clock? Will it be a big deal?
Well, I've heard a lot of people say that it's going to give more shots, may not be better shots, and so I think that'll be the question that needs to be asked. I think another thing that we're really starting to see a lot in college basketball, and it's trickling down to the NAIA level too now, is the advanced scouting. I mean, all these coaches have access to so much tape now. Yep. They break down their opponents in ways that weren't being done 10 years ago, and I think that's really led a lot to lower scoring games too, just because teams are so much better at defending their opponents.
Well, I think one thing I do like about the shot clock is the fact that at the end of the game, when it's interesting, you're not going to be able to burn as much time, and so maybe that creates some extra possessions, makes things a little bit more interesting down the stretch in some of these games, maybe create some more strategy that way, just in how the game is coached at the end.
And you talk about end of game situations. They're talking about one other proposal would be to take a timeout away in the second half. As a coach, would you guys agree with that? That's almost sacred, isn't it, for coaches to have that many timeouts?
Well, I mean, you don't burn them early because you want them late, because you're going to want to set something up. So yeah, that'll affect things, but that's coming from a coach. I didn't call very many timeouts. Yeah. Now that may change with a different team, but
And I think it really impacts maybe the lower levels like D2 NAI, because you guys don't have the media timeouts like the Division I has. I mean, those guys get plenty of timeouts, in my opinion, every 4 minutes.
Well, last year in the national tournament, we play the whole season with no media timeouts, and then the national championship game is on ESPN3, and then they added media timeouts, and all of a sudden you got a minute and a half to talk to your guys, or you had 30 seconds, you run out of things to say. And it's a very different game. The flow is different, and you just, you got built-in timeouts to come out and run sets and do all those kinds of different things. So it's a different flow.
Did you just tell us you ran out of things to say? Because I find that hard to believe, Matt. You're a guy with a lot of work.
It's easy to believe because there's so many stoppages.
When we were shooting 23%, there wasn't a lot to say at that point. You go from, we scored 40 points under our average, and but yeah, it was a different game. It was a different game, but both teams play with it. So that's all right.
But those are the big ones they're talking about: reducing the shot clock from 35 seconds down to 30, maybe taking away a timeout that you can carry over into the second half. Just trying to get things to not stop so much late in ball games. I think if you can do any of those things, that's probably a good idea. I'm not sure exactly how you go about doing it, but to keep things flowing at the end of a game, coming out of timeouts, getting things going. If a guy fouls out, you got get a guy in there more quickly. Things like that are good ideas.
You make a good point though. It's harder to build momentum and keep your run going when you're always stopping. As far as scoring points, the NAIA is such an up and down game because there aren't stops. You can erase a 10-point deficit quick, and in the major colleges with built-in medias, guys are calling timeouts to slow the game down, knowing medias are coming. It's a lot choppier game, and as far as shooting and scoring basket goes, there's a lot to do with momentum, flow, and confidence in a game, and I think that plays a factor too.
All right, we're going to pick up a little bit more on this. There's one other men's rule change that might have a big effect. The women's game is talking about leaving the 20-minute half format and going to 4 quarters for some reason, and we'll talk about that when we come back here on Benchwarmers.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers at Buffalo Wild Wings in Sioux Falls, and talking about college basketball and some possible changes to the game as far as rules go that could be approved this week. And let's finish up with that on the men's side. The restricted arc, you see that little circle, that little half circle under the basket. It's at 3 feet right now. They've done some experiments with moving it out to 4 feet, and this is where the block charge call comes into play, and everybody goes nuts over this call 5 or 6 times a game. They're thinking about moving it out a foot. Why would this make a big difference?
Well, you think a foot wouldn't be a lot, but it will make a difference as far as, you see guys coming over and trying to draw a charge, to take a charge. You got to be there a lot earlier, and your movement's got to be there a lot quicker. And you talk about leaving your feet to go finish a shot. It's just going to be harder to draw a charge. You're just going to see a lot more blocks with it, and you'll see guys not even trying to take a charge.
That might be the biggest thing, right?
Where you're just like, you're not there. You can't take that chance. So I'm in favor of it. I had a bunch of guys last year. I didn't want to get into foul trouble, so I was like, hey, we're not taking charges. That's not going to be a big part of our game, and so you're probably going to see that same thing continue with it being out further, because you got to be in better position.
Yeah. The experiments they did with it in the NIT last year, the number of calls that they had to make went down, so that made a difference right there.
And I think that's one of the big things that the officials would love, because we already mentioned that's one of the toughest of calls, if not the toughest call for officials to have to make. And you talk to officials, they don't really like to have to make it, because it's bang bang, and it's a tough one to make. We love replaying it and slowing it down and trying to make that judgment call, and it's easy for us to sit there and do that. But when it's full speed and you only got one crack at it, and so I think the fewer of those calls you can make, the better. And then I think also another big factor is the injury factor too. I mean, you got these athletes that are, they're skying off the ground, and the less contact that can happen when guys are vulnerable up in the air, and losing their balance, I think that is safer for the game too.
All right, another thing that might free up some offense on the men's side. On the women's side, Jay, you've talked a lot to the USD coaches down there. They're proposing that the women's game not play 20-minute halves anymore, play 4 quarters. What do you think about this? What are they saying down at USD?
Well, we talk about all these changes, and they're all going to have some sort of impact on the game if, in fact, they are passed and adopted. But I think this one is the most dramatic, certainly, because you're talking about changing the entire style, the entire format of a game. You go from halves and a set number of media timeouts to a new number of media timeouts and 4 quarters, which is what you're used to seeing kids play growing up until they get to, in some states the high school level, but a lot of states are still playing the quarter format as well. And I think, again, it's designed to help improve the flow of the game. Whether or not it does that, I guess time will tell. I think one thing that has really going for it is the fact that Gino Auriemma, UConn's head coach, who's won 10 national championships, has come out and he is very much in favor of this move. And if you got heavy hitters like that on your side, it seems awful likely that we could see this actually come to fruition. So whether or not it will improve the game, I think time will tell.
Yeah, that's the thing. And he's pushing it more toward the international level where they play quarters in the women's game. He wants it to get more in sync with that. But coaches, you're talking to a Dakota Wesleyan. What do they say?
Well, it's with basketball, it's all trickle-down stuff. Every rule change we're talking about is coming from the NBA, shortening the shot clock and playing quarters and trying to get the game more appealing that way. And this wouldn't be a big factor for us. I think how you're coaching and how you're doing it. But it does change. Instead of playing 2 halves, you got 4 quarters, so it breaks it up more, and momentum, all that kind of stuff. Maybe plays a part. But the coaches I've talked to, our women's coach, Jason Christensen over at Dakota Wesleyan, he's in favor of it, but I don't think he sees it as being a huge factor in the way he's going to coach.
I think the biggest impact of it is you've got 2 more opportunities where you have end-of-clock situations. And if you watch the NBA game, they love the 2-for-1 type of thing where coaches will really strategize down that last minute. How can you squeeze out an extra possession? And so that's where I think it really could impact the game, is you could see teams really trying to utilize that to get an extra possession here and there.
And are players just going to play? Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I think one thing that, in talking to one of the assistants at USD, Chuck Love, has said that USD kind of, they approach those media timeouts. So you talk about losing a media timeout here. Well, maybe you don't have to draw anything up during a media timeout. It's a planned break, but you may change how you defend something. Your strategy may be going into that, I'm going to adjust or take a look and see if we need to make some changes within how we're playing this game. You lose one opportunity to do that. So that's one thing Chuck said we'll have to kind of go back to the drawing board, so to speak, to figure out how we're going to make those changes going forward if we do lose that media time.
And I've always liked making players think more than they do. Make the players make some decisions out there, and don't let the coaches make all the decisions. Does that offend you in any way?
Not at all. Not at all. And in fact, I say that to our guys a lot. Our style of play, I don't want them worried about me on the sideline when they're playing. They got to be able to make plays and make shots without me. They need to be free and confident. And so I turn it over to our players a lot more when the games go on. I mean, my time is in practice. We get figured out what we need to do there, and then they got to perform, and it's their game. But the other part of it is the free throw situation. With 4 quarters, they're talking about going to a bonus earlier, and and all of that. So that would probably have as much of impact as anything.
All right. Yeah. And players are just going to play no matter what the rules are. It affects the coaches probably more than anything.
Yep.
All right. We'll see what changes do go into effect in college basketball. Still a great game. I'm still going to watch. Still fun.
It's the best game ever.
Yeah. All right. We will talk about the NBA Finals when we come back. Who's the real MVP here, LeBron James or Matthew Dellavedova for the Cleveland Cavs?
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers at Buffalo Wild Wings here on Louise Avenue in Sioux Falls. Let's talk about the NBA Finals. As we sit here, it's a 1-1 series, both games in overtime. Who do you like? Let's just go down the line. Who do you like and why?
I still like the Warriors. I think they've got more depth, frankly, and they've got, overall better shooters, I think. And I just think that home court advantage, when they get back there, that's such a huge thing. And while Cleveland has tested them in the first 2 games, continuing to do that in a place where they have been so dominant all year, I find hard to believe. So if they get in a situation where they get an opportunity to close it out at home, I really like the Warriors.
Yeah, I like the Warriors too. You watch what Cleveland's had to do these first 2 games, how hard they've played, and to split. And at times it looks like Golden State's just kind of, it's the finals, but Cleveland looks like they're exerting more energy. They're obviously not as deep, but I don't know. I like the Warriors, but you just see what LeBron James is doing on this basketball team for Cleveland and what he means to it. It's hard to count out the best player in the world, too.
I'm not the biggest LeBron fan, but it is unbelievable how he's carried the team with Kyrie Irving, with Kevin Love out of the lineup. You got Mike Miller has gotten some minutes in Game 2 here, but who do you like?
I really do think Cleveland could pull this thing off. Getting that win in Game 2 is huge. They've really got the home court now. You look at it with getting the split on the road, and so I think they could pull this thing off. You get a guy like LeBron that could carry a team, and if they can get a role player just to step up and play above the level that they've played at in this year, I think it could be enough for them.
Matthew Dellavedova. I tweeted once about 2 weeks ago that I can't believe Dellavedova is in the NBA and Nate Walters is not. But Dellavedova has played some defense, and he's starting point guard for the Cavs. What do you think of Dellavedova?
Well, he's one of those guys. He's taken a lot of criticism with how he's played because a few guys have ended up getting hurt underneath him, and but he plays his tail off, and he just does everything that you like to see as a coach. He's one of those gritty type of guys. I mean, he guarded Derrick Rose. In the Chicago series, Rose had a hard time, and you saw what he did in Game 2 with Curry. But I think a lot of this is a LeBron James deal. I mean, you look at his career and the rosters that he's been around, and you talk about the big 3, but Dwayne Wade was at the end of it. But his team in Cleveland that he took to the finals, and the team that he's got here now, I mean, he just makes guys a lot better. And that's probably this whole Cleveland team and what they're doing, like Dellavedova and J.R. Smith and Shumpert and Tristan Thompson, is probably a little bit more. You got to give credit to LeBron James for being able to bring that out of these guys.
Cleveland has never won the NBA championship. They lost in the finals in 2007. Golden State won it back in 1975. So one of these teams is going to be a really good story. But wouldn't it have been fun if the Timberwolves could have put together a team like Golden State has? And you go back and look at the draft picks over the last 4 or 5 years, and it is pretty cool what Steve Kerr has done as a head coach and how they put the team together at Golden State.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I love the culture that Steve Kerr's built in just 1 year there, and you can see what that's meant for them. And I think a lot of times people think, well, does coaching really matter in the NBA? And we could see what Steve Kerr has done, and certainly it does.
But just to look back at the draft, in 2009, Steph Curry was the number 7 pick. Of course, the Timberwolves took Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn ahead of Steph Curry. And then in 2011, Klay Thompson was the number 11 pick in the draft. Minnesota had the number 2 pick and took who? You remember? Derek Williams, not playing with the Wolves anymore. But you just look back at the drafts and how teams get built and how things fall together. And the Timberwolves just can't seem to figure it out. Maybe they will with the number 1 pick they've got coming up.
Well, that the draft is, while you can try to project, you just don't know who's got the Steph Curry gene. I mean that guy coming in, he's 6'3", 190 pounds. How is he going to hold up over the course of the game? You've seen what Cleveland's done to him. Now they're just trying to body him up and play him physical.
And he is 6'3". He looks like he's tiny.
Right. Yeah. And it's tough. Obviously, Minnesota's going to get a big guy, in Towns or Okafor, and I think either one of those guys are going to be big-time players. So.
All right, NHL final, Stanley Cup final. Jay, touch on it quick. You're a hockey guy. Who you like, Tampa Bay and Chicago?
Well, coming into this series, I thought Chicago would take it in 5, probably tops. And I've got to give Tampa Bay some credit. I think through the first couple of games, they out-physicaled Chicago. They hit them more, and they limited those big-name guys, the Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews. They have 1 combined point between them through the first 2 games of this series. That can't continue for Chicago to be successful. They just don't have enough firepower beyond those guys. I mean, you need those guys at this point in the year. And so Tampa Bay, I just didn't think would be able to hold up. They played a lot of games to get to this point. You figured fatigue would maybe set in at some point, but it hasn't. They've played toe-to-toe with these guys. They probably should have won Game 1, if not for a crazy rally by Chicago over the last 6.5 minutes of that one. It could very well be 2-0 right now. So Tampa Bay through 2 games has to be pretty excited where they're sitting.
But it's Tampa Bay. It's Florida. You can't have a Florida team winning the Stanley Cup. It's got to be Chicago. All right. When we come back, a question from the crowd in our Winging It segment.
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers. Time for our Winging It segment here at Buffalo Wild Wings. A question from the crowd, and for that, we go to Austin Bramley.
Hey, thanks, Tom. I'm here with Don from Sioux Falls, and he has a question for our panel.
Can the Twins maintain their hot streak?
All right, that's the question. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Don, for that question. And the Minnesota Twins, surprise, surprise, first place in the division. Quickly, can they keep this thing going? What do you think?
It's hard for me to believe that, but it's also hard to believe that they're in the position that they're at right now. And I think it all comes down to pitching. If they continue to get good performances, get these guys going deep into games, give them quality starts every night, anything could happen, sure.
All right, Matt, maybe your wife could answer this question better than you.
Yeah, she's the one she's the Twins fan in our household. But yeah, you see what the Twins are doing, and it's not too far away from what the Royals did last year. They got onto a hot streak and just continued to going, and that's kind of how baseball works. You get good pitching and get the hits when you need them, and you can carry anything out, and so you got to believe they can.
All right.
Well, as a Royals fan, I always worried that was the Detroit Tigers, and now all of a sudden the Twins come up out of nowhere and they're in first place, but I have a hard time thinking they're going to be able to maintain this through the dog days of summer.
I do too. As a Royals fan, I still think the Royals have the lineup, and they've been so up and down in the last 10 games or so, but Detroit's fallen off a little bit. Cleveland doesn't look that good, so maybe the Twins can keep it up there through halfway through the season. Yeah, Twins are the Royals. I can see one of them's going to win it, I think. All right, our poll question when we come back on Benchwarmers. Out of the teams in the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Final, who do you want to see win a championship finally?
Benchwarmers on Midco Sports Network is presented by Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome back to Benchwarmers. Our poll question this week, we went into the crowd here at Buffalo Wild Wings. Which team would you like to see win a championship this June? The Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State Warriors, Chicago, or Tampa Bay in the NHL? Golden State with 40% of the vote here. Why so much love for the Golden State Warriors, you think?
I think they're new. It's been a long time for them, and the other part of that equation is they'd rather see them win it than LeBron win it, I think.
That's a big
I'd
factor.
Probably put that same order on it myself, but it's not because I don't like LeBron. I think it's cool that Golden State, after being kind of a doormat for such a long time, has become this kind of powerhouse, and Steph Curry's an awfully great story as well. Just kind of the little guy in the NBA that's coming out and a better shooter than everybody.
What do you think, Matt?
Well, I'm not a big LeBron guy, but I'm just very impressed with the guy. For him, what he does for a roster, this would be a LeBron James championship if he were able to pull this thing off. And he gets hit pretty hard with all the antics, everything that goes with it, and I've just been really impressed with him, though.
All right, thanks, guys. Jay Elsen's got Midco Motorsports here on Midco Sports Network on Thursdays this summer. Check that out. Matt Wilber's going to go back to Mitchell and figure out how to win 33 games next year. And Brad Newitt going to be coaching some ball this summer. We'll see you next week in Grand Forks.